Garrett Dawson wiped the sweat from his brow as he bent over the broken-down mower, the early summer sun already scorching his neck. "Come on, you rusty piece of junk," he muttered, giving it a hard pull. It coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. He glanced at the house, massive, modern, and so out of place in their small-town neighborhood that it looked like someone had dropped a magazine cover onto a modest street. The lawn was a jungle, the front porch had unopened packages stacked like furniture, and the trash bins were still full from last week. The new owner had moved in 2 weeks ago, but no one had seen her. Rumors spread fast in a town this small. Some said she was a recluse. Others said she was just a burnt-out rich woman hiding from the world. Garrett didn't care. He had more pressing things to worry about, like making sure his 6-year-old daughter had lunch and a working air conditioner back home. He'd picked up odd jobs since getting laid off from the construction crew last month, and mowing lawns paid just enough to get by. "Daddy, you missed a spot," a tiny voice called. Garrett turned and saw his daughter, Nora, standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed and a juice pouch in one hand. "I'll get it, boss," he teased, pushing the mower back over the patch she'd pointed out. The front door creaked open behind him. He looked up and froze. A woman stepped out onto the porch, barefoot in a wrinkled gray t-shirt and shorts, her dark hair in a messy bun. She had the kind of exhausted beauty that hit you like a punch to the chest. Eyes too sharp to be ignored, cheekbones sculpted like marble, and yet she looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days. "Hi," she said, her voice scratchy like she barely used it. Garrett killed the mower and stepped forward. "Sorry, ma'am." "I didn't mean to, just figured your lawn could use a cut." She blinked at him. "You're not with a company?" "No, ma'am, just me. I live 2 blocks down. Figured I'd do it while my daughter's with me. Hope that's all right." Her eyes dropped to Nora, who waved sweetly, then back to Garrett. "You have a daughter," Garrett nodded. "Yeah, she's 6 going on 30. I'm Garrett, by the way." She hesitated. "I'm Sienna Prescott. Nice to meet you, Sienna." She glanced at the freshly trimmed strip of grass. "How much do I owe you?" He shook his head. "Don't worry about it." "Wasn't doing anything else today." She stared at him for a long second. "You're just mowing strangers' lawns for free. That obvious, huh?" He gave a sheepish smile. "Honestly, I figured you looked like you needed a break." Her shoulders dropped, and for a second, Garrett thought she might cry. But instead, she laughed short and breathless, like it surprised her. "You have no idea," she whispered. "Then let me finish the lawn, no charge. Think of it as neighborhood goodwill." She stepped down off the porch. "At least let me get you guys something cold to drink." Garrett opened his mouth to protest, but Nora beat him to it. "Apple juice, please," Sienna smiled. "Coming right up." She disappeared inside, and Garrett turned back to the mower, heart thudding harder than it should have. The rest of the lawn took 20 minutes. When he finished, he looked up to see Sienna sitting on the porch steps beside Nora, handing her a popsicle. She looked more relaxed already, like someone had finally let her breathe. When Garrett joined them, Sienna passed him a lemonade in a glass so fancy he didn't dare hold it with one hand. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "I wanted to," she said softly, watching Nora lick melted juice from her fingers. "I haven't had anyone around in a while. It's nice." "Normal." Garrett took a sip of the drink. "You just move in. 2 weeks ago, from Chicago. Big city girl, huh?" he teased. "Not anymore," she said, and something flickered in her eyes. "I needed a break from everything." He didn't pry. He knew the look of someone running from something. "Small town's a good place to hide," he said. "Or to heal," she murmured. Garrett glanced at his daughter. "You'll like it here. People are nosy but kind. Nora's already decided you're her new best friend." Sienna smiled. "I'm honored." As the sun dipped lower, Garrett stood. "We should head back. Nora's got a mountain of macaroni and cheese waiting for her." Sienna stood too. "Thank you again, Garrett. Really, I didn't realize how much I needed that today." He paused, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled note card. "Here's my number. I do house repairs too, if you ever need anything." She took it, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you." That night, while washing dishes, Garrett found himself thinking about her. Not the lawn, not the house, but her. The way her voice cracked when she laughed. The way she'd looked at Nora like she was something precious. She didn't act like someone rich. No fancy clothes, no attitude, just tired. Human. He didn't know she had a fortune in a trust account or that back in Chicago, the last man she trusted had tried to sell her out for a merger. He didn't know her last name could buy half the town. All he knew was that Sienna Prescott had smiled at him like no one had in years, and he wanted to see that smile again. The knock on the door came just as Sienna was wrapping gauze around her palm. She'd sliced it on the edge of a cardboard box while trying to unpack the last of her kitchen things. Blood dotted the floor beside the island, a few droplets staining the hem of her oversized shirt. She eyed the door, uncertain. It was early evening and she hadn't ordered anything. Her groceries were still sitting in the back seat of her car. She hadn't planned on seeing anyone. When she opened it, Garrett stood there, holding a brown paper bag and a plastic container with aluminum foil peeking out. "I figured you might not have had time to cook," he said. "Brought you dinner," Sienna blinked. "Why would you?" He shifted his weight, eyes dropping to the gauze on her hand. "You okay?" She stepped back instinctively, not from fear but from the sudden awareness that someone had noticed. "Cut myself, it's nothing." Garrett handed her the bag. "Still. You shouldn't be unpacking and bleeding alone." "I didn't realize that was against the law," she said, but her voice lacked the bite. He smiled faintly. "Maybe not in most towns, but around here we take care of people. Especially the ones trying to put their lives back together." Sienna hesitated. Then, instead of brushing him off, she opened the door wider. "You want to come in?" He followed her into the kitchen, eyes scanning the half-unpacked boxes and the sleek gray countertops that still had tags hanging from the appliances. "Place is beautiful," he said. "Feels like it's waiting for someone to live in it." Sienna set the bag down and pulled out 2 containers. "I haven't figured out how to make it feel like mine yet." Garrett nodded but didn't press her. Instead, he opened one of the containers and handed her a fork. "It's meatloaf. Not fancy, but Nora says it's the best thing I make." Sienna took a bite. Her eyes widened. "She's not wrong." He leaned against the counter. "I'll let her know. She'll be thrilled." They ate in silence for a minute, the kind that didn't feel awkward. Sienna noticed the way he scanned the room, not judging, but cataloging. The way someone did when they were used to fixing things that others overlooked. "How long have you been on your own?" she asked suddenly. Garrett glanced at her. "Since Nora was 2, her mom left. Said she wasn't made for small towns or diapers." Sienna paused, fork midway to her mouth. "That's awful." He looked down at his hands. "It was at first, but Nora's the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't regret a second of it." She believed him, every word. There was no bitterness in his tone, just quiet truth. "I don't think I've ever met anyone like you," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "That a good thing?" "I'm still deciding." Garrett chuckled. "Fair enough." Sienna set her container down and leaned against the counter beside him. "Do you ever feel like you're just pretending to be okay so people won't ask questions you don't want to answer?" He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Every day." She drew in a breath, let it out slowly. "That's what it feels like, being here. Like I'm trying to remember who I was before everything fell apart." Garrett didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. Instead, he placed his empty container on the counter and stood straighter. "You don't have to remember all at once. Sometimes you just need a place to start." Sienna tilted her head. "And this is yours, fixing people's lawns." "No," he said, "but it's what I can do, and sometimes showing up for someone is enough." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're a better man than most people I knew back in Chicago," he shrugged. "Maybe you were hanging around the wrong people." She gave a dry laugh. "Apparently." The door creaked open behind them and Nora ran in, cheeks pink from the late sun, her sandals thudding against the floor. "Daddy, Miss Sienna's house has the biggest backyard ever. Can I show her the dance I made up?" Sienna glanced at Garrett. "A dance," he laughed. "She's been choreographing one for the school carnival." Sienna crouched down, ignoring the tug on her bandaged hand. "I'd be honored." Nora beamed, pulled her toward the sliding glass door, and opened it wide. The 3 of them stepped into the overgrown grass, the last rays of sunlight spilling across the yard in gold streaks. As Nora twirled and jumped in the uneven grass, Sienna really laughed for the first time in what felt like years. Garrett stood beside her, watching his daughter with pride but keeping his eyes on Sienna when she wasn't looking. He didn't know about the 10-figure trust account she'd walked away from. He didn't ask about the boardroom betrayal that had shattered everything she'd built. He didn't care about the designer labels boxed in her closet, or the black card still tucked in the back of her wallet like a ghost. He just brought her dinner, stood beside her in the dusk, and watched a little girl dance like the world hadn't hurt anyone. And for the first time in months, Sienna didn't feel like she was pretending. She felt real, she felt seen, and she wasn't ready to let that go. The sharp knock on Garrett's front door came just as he was drying the last dish. Nora was on the floor with her crayons, humming to herself while drawing something that involved a lot of stars and stick figures with very long eyelashes. He opened the door and blinked. Sienna stood there, rain-soaked from the sudden summer downpour, holding a large cardboard box with both hands. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her T-shirt plastered to her skin. She looked like she'd run straight from a thundercloud and hadn't cared one bit. "I'm sorry for just showing up like this," she said breathlessly. "I didn't know who else to ask." Garrett stepped aside. "Come in before you catch pneumonia." She entered the modest living room, careful not to drip on the rug, and set the box on his coffee table. Nora looked up, eyes wide. "You look like a mermaid who got caught in a storm," she said with a grin. Sienna laughed, pushing hair off her face. "That's actually not the worst thing I've been called today." Garrett handed her a towel from the hallway. "What happened?" She dried her arms, then nodded toward the box. "I finally opened the last of my storage crates. Found this. It's my mother's journals. She passed away when I was 16, and I forgot I even had them." Garrett studied her face. Something unreadable lay beneath her words. "I started reading them," she went on. "And I realized how little I actually knew about the kind of life she wanted for herself. She used to dream about small towns, gardens, quiet days. I always thought she was just being sentimental. But now—" Her voice trailed off. Garrett waited. "I think she was right," Sienna said quietly. "About everything. I spent so long chasing the kind of life I thought I was supposed to want, and now I look around and none of it feels real anymore." He pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit. "You want tea?" "Or something stronger. Tea's perfect." As he stepped into the kitchen, Nora slid beside Sienna and pointed at the box. "Can I see what's inside?" Sienna hesitated, then opened the flaps. Inside were notebooks with faded covers, a few black and white photographs, and a velvet pouch. "This one she wrote when she was around my age," Sienna said, pulling out a journal with purple ink stains across the spine. Nora touched one of the photographs. "Is that her?" "Yes, that's my mom." "She looks like a movie star," Nora whispered. "She was," Sienna murmured. "To me anyway." Garrett returned with 2 mugs. Sienna took one, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. "She ever live in a place like this?" he asked. "No," Sienna said. "She grew up in New York, met my dad there. He came from old money, very old money. The kind that pretends feelings don't exist. When she passed, I was pushed straight into their world. Decisions were made for me, where I'd go to school, what internships I'd take, who I'd be seen with." Garrett leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. "And you never got a say." "I thought I did," she said, "until I tried to step away." He didn't press for details, but she saw the understanding in his eyes, not pity, just quiet recognition. "I didn't come here to unload all this," she said with a rueful smile. I needed to be around someone who doesn't expect anything from me, who doesn't know the version of me that got printed in business magazines." Garrett studied her for a moment. "I don't care about any of that," he said. "Whatever's in your past, it's not what I see now." She looked away quickly, but not before he caught the flicker of emotion in her eyes. "I've been thinking," she said after a pause, "about doing something with the property. The backyard's a mess, but it's big, maybe a community garden. Or a little greenhouse, there's enough space." "That'd be something," he said. "This town could use that. Kids don't get outside enough anymore." "I don't know how to build anything," she admitted, "but I'd like to learn." "You're talking to the right guy," Garrett said, gesturing to himself. "I can teach you what I know. Just don't blame me if the first few attempts look like a toddler hammered them together." She laughed quietly. "Deal." Nora tugged on Sienna's arm. "If we grow strawberries, can I name the plants?" "Only if you promise to share them," Sienna replied, tapping Nora's nose. It was after dark when Garrett walked her to the door. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet earth and honeysuckle. Sienna paused on the porch, her hand resting lightly on the railing, Thank you, she said softly. For what? For not asking questions I'm not ready to answer. He nodded once. You'll tell me when you're ready. I will. She turned to go, then stopped. And Garrett. If I ever start talking too much about compost or seedling trays, promise you'll tell me to shut up. No way, he said. I'll just hand you a shovel. As she walked back toward her house, Garrett watched the way her shoulders had uncoiled, the way her steps felt steadier than before. Something had shifted, not just in her, in him too. And he wasn't sure what it meant yet, but he knew he was already in deeper than he should have been. He closed the door, turned off the lights, and found Nora asleep on the couch with one of Sienna's old photographs clutched in her hand. Something told him this wasn't just a friendship. And if he wasn't careful, he was going to fall for a woman who lived in a world he could never touch, or so he thought. Garrett stood frozen on the gravel path, his heart thudding against his ribs as he stared at the glossy black SUV pulling into Sienna's driveway. Out stepped a man in a tailored navy suit, umbrella already raised, shoes too clean for the muddy ground. He moved with the kind of self-importance Garrett had seen before always in city men who assumed the world bent for them. Sienna was on the porch, arms crossed, expression unreadable. You weren't supposed to come here, she said. The man ignored her tone and walked up the steps like he owned the place. You stopped answering your phone. Your board is in chaos, Sienna. People are talking, investors are spooked. You can't just vanish. I didn't vanish, she said. I left. That was the point. Garrett didn't mean to listen, but his boots were rooted to the ground and every word hit like a hammer to the chest. Board, investors. The man stepped closer. You're still the majority shareholder, whether you like it or not. And now there's talk you've been seen with some. Handaman, do you know what that's doing to the press whispers? Sienna's jaw tightened. You flew out here to talk about town gossip. I flew out here to remind you who you are, the man said. You're Sienna Prescott. The woman who ran Prescott and Vale's tech division like a machine. You can't throw that away for I already did, she snapped. And I'm not coming back. The man stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You're walking away from $1 billion empire. I'm walking toward something that doesn't make me hate myself. Garrett turned away then, his hands clenched at his sides. He didn't need to hear more. The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. The understated elegance, the way she never flinched at prices, the house that didn't match the street, it all made sense now. And he hated how foolish he felt. He walked back to his truck, climbed in, and drove home without looking back. The next morning, Garrett didn't answer when Sienna knocked. She stood on his porch, holding a paper bag of breakfast biscuits and a coffee she knew he liked, but the door stayed shut. Nora wasn't in the yard. The house was too quiet. Later that day, she found him at the lumberyard, loading planks into the back of his truck. You weren't going to call, she asked, stepping into his line of sight. He didn't look at her. Figured you had company. He's gone. Garrett set a beam down carefully. He's not wrong, is he, about who you are? Sienna exhaled. No, he's not. You're a billionaire, he said flatly. I was born into that world, yes, but the money's not, it's not the point, he interrupted. The point is I should have heard it from you. She stepped closer. I didn't know how to bring it up without changing everything. You didn't need to hide it, he said, finally meeting her eyes. You just needed to trust me. I do. Not enough, he said. You let me think we were building something real, but how real can it be when I don't even know your last name? Sienna swallowed hard. I was scared, Garrett. Of what? Of you walking away the second you saw me differently. Garrett's voice was low. I didn't need to see your bank account to fall for you, Sienna. I just needed to know you were honest with me. She looked down at her hands. I wasn't trying to lie, I wanted to be someone who could start over, not Sienna Prescott, just Sienna. Garrett backed away half a step. I don't know what you want from me now. I want to fix this, she said, if you'll let me. He didn't answer, just turned and climbed into his truck. That night, the front porch of Sienna's house was dark. Her lights were off. Garrett stood across the street, watching from his window while Nora slept on the couch. He should have been angry. He should have stayed angry. But all he could think about was the look in her eyes when she said she wanted to be someone new. The next morning, a soft knock came on his door. When he opened it, the first thing he saw was Nora, standing in her pajamas, holding a small envelope. She said it's for you, she said. Inside was a handwritten letter. Garrett, I understand why you're hurt. I should have told you the truth. Not because I owed it to you, but because you're the only person I've met in years who made me feel like I didn't have to pretend. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for one more chance to show you the version of myself that doesn't exist in press releases and boardrooms. Come to the backyard tonight. If you still want to walk away afterward, I won't stop you, but I hope you don't. Sienna, the sun had barely dipped by the time Garrett took Nora to his sister's house and crossed the street with hesitant steps. He entered the backyard and froze. Twinkling lights were strung from one tree to another, casting a soft glow over a makeshift path lined with clay flower pots. In the center, a table had been set with 2 plates, mismatched chairs, and a candle that flickered stubbornly against the breeze. Sienna stood beside it, nervous, holding a basket of bread rolls and wearing jeans stained with dirt. I planted everything today, she said. Tomatoes, herbs. Strawberries. I thought if I kept waiting for the perfect moment, I'd never start. Garrett stepped closer. You did this. I wanted to build something real, she said, with my hands, not spreadsheets. He looked around at the lights, the soil still fresh, the tools leaning against the fence. I didn't do this to impress you, she added. I did it because it's the first time in my life that something felt honest. Garrett rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. You didn't need to prove anything. I know, she said. But I wanted to. He watched her for a long moment, then stepped toward the table. You really think strawberries will grow here? I have no idea, she said, but I want to try. He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. Then we try. And under the glow of quiet lights, the ghost of her past finally loosened its grip. The woman who had once been lost in skyscrapers and boardrooms had found something stronger in a broken mower, a 6-year-old's dance, and a man who didn't care about wealth. She wasn't running anymore, and neither was he. Rain tapped gently on the windows as the last of the guests filtered out of the community greenhouse's opening celebration. What had once been an overgrown lot now brimmed with life-raised beds, rows of vegetables, hanging flower baskets, and a small shaded area where kids painted signs for the garden's different sections. The town had shown up in full, hands full of baked goods and stories, their laughter weaving through the rows like sunlight. Garrett stood near the back, wiping his hands on a rag, his shirt damp from patching up a last-minute leak in the irrigation hose. Nora ran past with 2 other kids, her shoes muddy and her cheeks bright, calling out about a worm she'd found that looked like a tiny dragon. Sienna approached from the center of the garden, her hair pulled back with a patterned scarf, her jeans streaked with soil. She carried a clipboard full of volunteer sign-ups and a half-eaten brownie in her other hand. I think we just survived our first official event, she said, setting the clipboard on the table beside him. Garrett leaned against the wooden post, watching her with that quiet intensity she'd grown to recognize. You pulled it off. We pulled it off, she corrected. You kept the hose from turning into a geyser, and Nora persuaded half the town to adopt tomato plants. I'd say we're a decent team. He looked around the greenhouse, at the people still chatting on benches, the toddlers picking at strawberries under the mesh netting. Feels like something that'll last. It will, she said. I already filed the paperwork. The garden's officially under a nonprofit trust. It'll keep going even if I don't, his brow lifted. Going somewhere. No, she said softly. That's the point. I'm not running anymore. I've been building something here with my own hands, and for the first time in my life, I want to stay where I am. He looked at her for a long beat. You sure about that? I've never been more sure of anything. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I signed over my remaining shares of the company last week, all of them. Kept a few assets for the foundation, but the rest, gone. Garrett straightened. You gave it all up. I gave up what didn't feel like mine anymore, she said. The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner. He stepped toward her slowly until only inches separated them. You really don't miss it. The jet setting, the high-rise meetings, the limos and headlines. She placed her hand on his chest. I miss quiet mornings and coffee in your kitchen. I miss seeing Nora's drawings on my fridge. I miss you when you're not standing in front of me. Garrett's hand found hers. He looked down at her and his voice dropped to a low rasp. I tried not to fall for you. she smiled. You failed, I know. He leaned in and kissed her slow and sure while the distant laughter from the greenhouse faded into nothing. Her fingers curled into his shirt as the kiss deepened, grounding them both in a moment they'd both fought to deserve. When they pulled apart, her eyes sparkled. There's something else. What is it? She pulled him toward the far end of the garden, past the herb rows and the wheelbarrow still full of mulch. Near the back fence, a small sign had been staked into the soil. Nora helped me paint it, she said. Garrett read the words aloud. Prescott Garden. I wanted to honor my mother, she said. Not the name with the boardrooms and the headlines, but the woman who dreamed of quiet things. Garrett looked at her, pride warming his chest. She'd be proud of you. I hope so. Nora ran up a moment later, hands covered in marker ink. Can we stay for dinner at Miss Sienna's house? She said we can make pizza from the garden stuff. Garrett looked at Sienna, who nodded with a grin. We'll wash hands first, she promised. That evening, under string lights and the scent of oregano, they rolled out dough on Sienna's kitchen counter. Nora piled tomatoes, basil, and cheese in chaotic layers while Garrett manned the oven. Sienna poured lemonade into mismatched glasses and set the table with linen napkins she hadn't used since moving in. After dinner, Garrett tucked Nora into bed in the guest room, where her stuffed animals had migrated during the past few weeks. When he returned to the living room, Sienna was curled on the couch, barefoot, a blanket draped over her legs. He joined her, pulling her close. She rested her head on his shoulder. I've been thinking about something, he said. Dangerous, she teased. He ignored her grin. What if we built a cabin at the edge of the property? Just something small. A place for weekend retreats, maybe for families visiting town, something we do together. Her eyes lit up. We could use solar panels, make it eco-friendly, and maybe have a reading nook. And a porch swing, he added. She turned and looked at him, her voice suddenly quiet. This feels like a life I never let myself want. He kissed her temple. Good thing it's yours now. They sat in silence, the kind that spoke of peace, of choices made and not regretted. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves. Inside, nothing felt unsettled anymore. Months later, the cabin stood beneath the trees, painted white with blue shutters. It wasn't large, but it had everything they needed, and every detail had been built by their hands. The community garden flourished, drawing visitors from nearby towns, and not once did Sienna look back. Garrett proposed one autumn evening beneath the arbor she had hung with dried lavender and fairy lights. He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. He simply took her hand, looked her in the eye, and asked her to stay with him for all the quiet mornings, the muddy footprints, the burnt dinners, and every moment in between. She said yes before he finished the sentence. They married under the willow tree beside the garden, surrounded by neighbors, laughter, and rows of blooming sunflowers. Nora wore a crown of daisies and walked them down the aisle holding both their hands, no cameras, no articles. Just vows whispered like secrets and kisses that tasted like promises kept. And when night fell, and the last candle flickered out, Garrett and Sienna danced barefoot in the grass outside their home. No music, just the sound of crickets and their hearts beating in time. She had left an empire behind, and in its place she had built something far greater, a life that was hers. A family that chose her, a love that needed no spotlight to shine.